Have you ever sat in a room full of everything you ever wanted? Your phone in your hand, your favorite show playing, food on the table, music in your ears, and still felt completely, inexplicably empty? Have you ever scrolled for an hour, watched 3 episodes back to back, refreshed your feed 17 times, and walked away feeling not satisfied, not rested, not happy, but somehow even more hollow than before? If that feeling is familiar to you, if that quiet, nameless hunger lives somewhere in your chest, and you cannot explain where it comes from or why it never fully goes away, then what you are about to hear may be the most important thing you listen to this entire year. Because that emptiness is not a character flaw. It is not laziness. It is not ingratitude. It is something happening inside your brain, something biological, something measurable, something that has quietly been hijacked without your permission. And today, we are going to talk about what it actually is, what it does to you every single day, and most importantly, what happens when you are brave enough to face it directly for 7 full days. Your brain has a currency. It is called dopamine. And like any currency, its value depends entirely on how rare it is, how hard you work to earn it, and how much meaning it carries when it finally arrives. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure, as most people mistakenly believe. It is the chemical of anticipation, of pursuit, of the chase. It is what fires in your brain when you are about to receive a reward, not after you receive it, but in the moments leading up to it. It is the electricity behind desire itself. And for most of human history, that system worked beautifully. You worked for food, you earned rest, you built relationships slowly, you waited for seasons to change, and every reward that came felt enormous because it was genuinely difficult to obtain. Your brain's reward system was calibrated to a world that required patience, effort, and delayed gratification. And in that world, dopamine was powerful, meaningful, and deeply motivating. But then the world changed. And it changed faster than any brain could adapt to. Suddenly, every craving could be satisfied in seconds. Entertainment, connection, validation, stimulation, novelty, all of it available instantly, endlessly, at the touch of a screen. The brain, which had evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to treat rewards as rare and precious, was now being flooded with dopamine hits dozens of times every single hour. And what happens when you flood any system beyond its natural capacity? It adapts. It compensates. It turns down its own sensitivity just to survive the overwhelming input. Your brain literally reduces the number of dopamine receptors it maintains because it has learned that rewards are no longer rare. They are constant, they are cheap, and they are meaningless. And this is where that emptiness comes from. This is the scientific explanation for why you can have everything and feel nothing. Your reward system has been so overstimulated, so relentlessly bombarded, that it no longer responds to ordinary life the way it once did. The beautiful, the simple, the quiet, the real, none of it registers anymore, because your brain has been conditioned to expect the extraordinary every single minute. This is the crisis that Dr. Mindful Shift decided to confront head-on, not by reading about it, not by discussing it in theory, but by living it, 7 days, fully documented, completely honest, tracking every shift in mood, every disruption in sleep, every moment of clarity, and every moment of collapse. Because understanding dopamine depletion intellectually is one thing. Experiencing the reset firsthand, in real time, with no filters and no shortcuts, is something else entirely. And that decision, to document not just the victories but the struggle, not just the breakthroughs but the breaking points, is what separates a genuine experiment from a highlight reel. It is what separates wisdom earned from wisdom borrowed. What does it actually mean to go 7 days without dopamine hits? It does not mean sitting in an empty room staring at the wall. It does not mean punishing yourself or living like an ascetic monk. It means removing the artificial, the instant, the cheap, the scrolling, the binge-watching, the constant checking, the endless stimulation that has become so normalized we no longer even notice we are doing it. It means returning, slowly and deliberately, to a life where rewards are connected to real effort, real patience, and real meaning. It means allowing your brain the quiet it desperately needs to begin rebuilding the sensitivity it has lost. And in that quiet, something unexpected begins to happen. Something uncomfortable. Something that most people, when they first feel it, immediately try to escape. Because the first thing that comes when the noise stops is not peace. It is not clarity. It is not inspiration. The first thing that comes is the full, raw, unfiltered weight of everything you have been using that noise to avoid. Day one feels manageable. You feel a little restless, a little distracted, but mostly fine. You tell yourself this will be easy. You feel almost proud of yourself just for deciding to try. The brain still has residual stimulation from the days before. The tank is not yet empty. You sleep that night feeling quietly optimistic, like you have taken the first step towards something important, something that was waiting for you, something that your deeper self has been calling you toward for a very long time. You do not yet know what is waiting on the other side of this week. You do not yet know how uncomfortable day 3 will feel, or how radically different you will think about your own mind by the time day 7 finally arrives. But the experiment has begun. The question is whether you are willing to keep going when it stops feeling easy. Day 2 arrives quietly, but something has already shifted. The optimism of day 1 has not disappeared entirely, but it has thinned, like morning light through a curtain that has not yet been opened. You wake up reaching for your phone before you are even fully conscious, not because you need anything specific, not because you are expecting an important message, but because your hand simply moves on its own. That gesture, that automatic, unconscious reach, it is one of the most revealing moments of the entire experiment, because it shows you, with absolute clarity, that what you believed was a choice was never really a choice at all. It was a reflex, a conditioned response so deeply embedded in your daily routine that your body performs it before your mind has even had a chance to participate. And when you stop yourself, when you pull your hand back, set the phone face down, and sit with the silence instead, the silence does not feel peaceful. It feels loud. It feels like pressure. It feels like something is missing, like a frequency your nervous system was tuned to has suddenly gone off the air, and every part of you is straining to pick up the signal again. This is the beginning of what neuroscientists call dopamine baseline recalibration, and it is deeply, genuinely uncomfortable. Your brain, accustomed to receiving stimulation constantly, begins to register its absence as a threat, not a philosophical inconvenience, not a minor annoyance. A threat, the same category of signal that your nervous system uses for hunger, for danger, for pain. The irritability that creeps in on day 2 is not weakness. The low-grade anxiety that hums beneath everything is not a character flaw. It is your brain's reward circuitry doing exactly what it was designed to do, signaling urgency, demanding that you return to the behavior that was keeping it flooded. Understanding this does not make it comfortable, but it makes it survivable. Because when you know that what you are feeling is biological rather than personal, you stop fighting yourself and start observing yourself instead. And observation, as Dr. Mindful Shift has consistently shown through both research and lived experience, is always the first step toward genuine transformation. Day 3 is where most people quit. Not because the detox becomes physically unbearable, it does not. But because day 3 is the day the noise stops being loud enough to drown out everything underneath it. Day 3 is when the real contents of your inner world begin to surface. The thoughts you have been too busy to think. The emotions you have been too stimulated to feel. The questions you have been outrunning for months, maybe years. Questions about direction, about purpose, about whether the life you are living is actually the life you would choose if you stopped long enough to choose deliberately. These are not comfortable questions. They do not arrive gently. They arrive in the restless, overstimulated silence of a Wednesday afternoon when there is nothing to scroll through, nothing to skip to, nothing to fast forward past the feeling. And the feeling is this, that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, you handed the authorship of your own attention to an algorithm. And the algorithm, which was never designed to care about your peace or your growth or your depth, simply gave you more of whatever kept you clicking. Day 4 brings something unexpected, not relief, not clarity, not the breakthrough you were quietly hoping for. It brings flatness, a gray, uninspired, motivationally empty kind of flatness that feels almost worse than the restlessness of day 3. This is the trough. This is the bottom of the recalibration curve. The point at which your brain's dopamine system has been sufficiently deprived of artificial stimulation but has not yet rebuilt the sensitivity required to respond meaningfully to natural rewards. You sit outside, and the sky does not move you. You eat a meal, and it tastes like nothing special. You try to read, and the words do not land. Everything feels muted, distant, slightly out of reach, like joy is a language you once spoke fluently and have suddenly, completely forgotten. Most people who reach this point interpret it as failure. They decide the experiment is not working. They tell themselves they are simply not the kind of person who can do this, that something is wrong with them specifically, that other people may be able to reset, but they cannot. And so they reach for the phone. They turn the noise back on. And the momentary relief they feel in that moment, the immediate, chemical comfort of returning to the familiar stimulation, reinforces exactly the cycle they were trying to break. But here's what they do not know. Here is the thing that only becomes visible if you stay. That flatness, that gray, hollow, motivationally empty feeling that arrives on day 4, is not the absence of healing. It is the evidence of it. It is your brain in the most critical phase of reconstruction, dismantling the tolerance it built to survive overstimulation and beginning, slowly, quietly, invisibly, to rebuild the receptor sensitivity that will eventually allow ordinary life to feel extraordinary again. The darkness before day 5 is not a sign that nothing is happening. It is a sign that everything is happening, deep beneath the surface, in the neurological architecture of a mind that is finally, genuinely beginning to heal. Day 5 has not arrived yet. The suspense of this experiment is not whether the brain can recover. The suspense is whether you will still be here when it does. Whether you will trust the process long enough to see what waits on the other side of the discomfort. Whether you have enough faith in your own capacity to endure the quiet, not forever, just long enough for something real to grow back in the space where the noise used to live. Day 5 arrives like a window opening in a room that has been sealed for a very long time. Not a dramatic swing of light, not a sudden flood of inspiration, not the cinematic breakthrough that motivation culture has trained you to expect, but something quieter, something more honest, something that feels almost fragile in its gentleness. You wake up and the reaching does not happen. Not because you forced yourself to stop. Not because you exercised extraordinary willpower in that half-conscious moment between sleep and waking, but because for the first time and longer than you can remember, the silence does not feel like an absence. It feels like a presence. Like the room itself has a quality it did not have before, a texture, a stillness, a kind of quiet aliveness that your overstimulated nervous system was simply too overwhelmed to perceive before now. You notice the light coming through the window. You notice the sound of your own breathing. You notice that your chest feels lighter, that the low hum of anxiety that has been running beneath everything like background static has softened, not disappeared, but softened. And in that softening, something underneath it becomes audible for the first time. Your own thoughts, not the reactive, scrolling, dopamine-chasing surface thoughts that occupied every spare moment before this week. Your actual thoughts. Slower, deeper, connected to something real. This is what Dr. Mindful Shift calls the return of the signal. It is the moment in the recalibration process when the brain's reward sensitivity has recovered enough to begin registering natural stimuli again. The warmth of sunlight, the satisfaction of a completed task, the genuine pleasure of a meal eaten slowly and without distraction, the quiet but profound reward of being fully present in an ordinary moment. These are not small things. These are, in fact, the things that human beings were neurologically designed to find deeply meaningful. The problem was never that life became less beautiful. The problem was that our brains became less capable of perceiving that beauty, because the threshold for what registered as rewarding had been raised so far beyond the natural range that everything real, everything simple, everything genuinely nourishing fell below it and disappeared. Day 5 is the day the threshold begins to lower again, and what returns when it does is not extraordinary. It is ordinary, beautifully, profoundly, tears in your eyes ordinary. And you realize, with a kind of quiet astonishment, that ordinary was always enough. That ordinary was always more than enough. That you were always surrounded by more than enough. You had simply lost the ability to receive it. Day 6 deepens everything that day 5 began. Sleep, which had been disrupted and shallow through the middle days of the experiment, begins to shift. You fall asleep without the phone. You stay asleep without the 3 a.m. scroll. You wake up without the immediate, compulsive need to check something. And in that unhurried morning space, your mind begins to do something it has not done in years. It begins to think creatively, spontaneously, without agenda. Ideas arrive not because you were searching for them, but because you finally created the internal conditions in which they could. Productivity, which had felt impossible during the flatness of day 4, returns, but differently than before. Not the frantic, distracted, tab-switching productivity of someone trying to outrun their own restlessness. A slower, more focused, more genuinely effective kind of engagement with work that actually matters. You sit with one thing. You finish it. You feel the real, unmanufactured satisfaction of completion, and that satisfaction, earned through actual effort rather than simulated through a notification, registers in your brain as something meaningful. The reward system, slowly rebuilt and newly sensitized, responds to real life the way it was always meant to. And in that response, you begin to understand something that no amount of reading about dopamine science could have taught you. You begin to understand it in your body, in your nervous system, in the felt experience of a mind that is finally, genuinely, working for you instead of against you. Day 7 does not feel like a finish line. It feels like a beginning. It feels like the first day of a life you had forgotten was available to you. A life where your attention belongs to you, where your time is governed by intention rather than impulse, where the quiet is not something to escape, but something to return to deliberately and gratefully, as often as you need. The 7 days are over, but what they revealed cannot be unseen. You now know what your brain feels like when it is overstimulated beyond its natural capacity. You know what the recalibration process actually costs: the discomfort, the flatness, the emotional surfacing, the long patience of day 4. And you know what waits on the other side of that cost. Not perfection, not permanent enlightenment, not a life without struggle or distraction or the occasional compulsive scroll, but something more valuable than any of those things: awareness. The awareness of what you are doing when you reach for the cheap hit instead of sitting with the real feeling. The awareness of what you are trading when you choose stimulation over stillness. The awareness that you have a choice, that the choice is always available, and that every time you make it consciously you are, in the language that Dr. Mindful Shift has devoted this entire body of work to making accessible, literally rebuilding the architecture of your own mind. One day, one decision, one moment of chosen quiet at a time. That is not a small thing. That is everything. That is the whole experiment. That is the only revolution that has ever mattered, the one that begins and ends entirely inside you. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.